Many people are more scared of public speaking than dying. But is public speaking really just about speaking in public? Or is it something deeper? Are we talking more about communication here? How to communicate well with your family, with your friends, with your loved ones? Is that what public speaking skills help you develop? What if you could spend your life having wonderful communication without arguing with those really close to you? Would that help you enjoy your life, be able to achieve success? What if you could translate that into business, where you could create deep relationships with your clients so that they wanted to be with you, so they wanted to be your customer loyally to you?
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. Now, today, it's my great pleasure to welcome Brenden Kumarasamy. Brenden is the founder of Master Talk. He helps ambitious executives and coaches become the top 1% communicators in their industry. He runs training to help you master the art of communication and public speaking, teaching you how to speak more concisely and how to share ideas with the world that matter. Brenden Kumarasamy is the rockstar communicator. Welcome, Brenden.
Damian, the pleasure is absolutely mine. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's my pleasure. I've watched many of your videos and your speaking is superb. You are just an artful communicator. Do you want to take us back in time? Do you want to jump into the Wayback Machine? You might remember, I know you're a younger guy, but you might remember there's a DeLorean that Doc Brown invented, and when you hit 88 miles an hour, you can travel through time. Do you want to jump in that, travel back in time to some of the challenges that you faced early on in life that you had to overcome that helped you to do what you're doing now?
For sure, Damian. Lots of different challenges. We can list them off really quick. So the first one is I have a crooked left arm, a disability in my left arm because of a surgery I had when I was younger. So because of that, I know it's hard to tell from the videos, is whenever I speak standing up, people are always looking at my arm. They're not looking at my face. So because of that, I had a lot of anxiety growing up as a kid. So that's number one. Number two is French. Because I grew up in Montreal in Canada, French is a language that you need to speak to do well there. And I didn't know the language. So my whole life I educated myself in French. In other words, I was presenting a language I did not know. So when you would see me in the first or second grade classrooms, I'd look at the crowd and go, bonjour. And that was my life growing up as a kid. And then the third piece is I didn't really grow up with much either. You know, my parents were factory workers. And for me, the focus was how do I become successful in my life, which led me to funny enough, my accounting degree that I ended up getting, which is literally the opposite of what I do today. So there you go. That's my quick list of all the challenges.
The challenges, but when we come back to that, it's, you say you had a crooked arm and people would focus on that. And I think from a lot of people's perspective, and I know from mine when I was younger, there was always some feature that you had, whether it was weight or whatever, that you think people are focusing on. And whether they are or aren't, is that more of a perception, did you find, or was it something that you made it a bigger deal than it was? And how did you get over that?
I'm pretty sure it was the second, which is I probably made it a bigger deal than it actually was. 'Cause I barely think about it today, but
Yeah.
when I was a kid, I would think about it all the time. And
Mm.
that actually brings a point. A similar analogy is like an accent. I get the question all the time.
Yeah.
How do I get rid of my accent? And the answer is you don't. Accent is a mindset. If you're not bothered by it, your audience won't be. But if you go up to an audience, you go, "Hey, sorry guys, my left arm is crooked. I hope that doesn't bother you when I present." You go, "Well, I never thought about it until you mentioned it, so I guess it does bother me." Or versus, "Hey, I'm so sorry about my accent. I know it's so thick and you don't understand what I'm saying, but I'll do my best to present." People are going to say, "Well, I didn't have trouble listening to you, but now that you mention it, you're right. Your accent is kind of bothering me." So the idea is accent is mindset. Think about Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba. That guy's a really thick Chinese accent when he speaks English, but nobody cares because he's Jack Ma, and
Mm.
Jack Ma doesn't care. So that's really the key. Is over time you'll start being self-conscious about it, but over time you'll be able to overcome it for sure with practice.
Yeah. And is that the case of practicing to overcome it? Is it overcoming the accent, or overcoming your belief that the accent is, or whatever the affliction you think you have, or you may have, but whatever that affliction is it over time overcoming the belief that that's a negative? And I'm drawing from here. I heard Arnold Schwarzenegger talk about when he was wanting to be an actor after he'd done the bodybuilding career. He wanted to get into acting, and everyone was telling him, you need to get rid of that accent. You need to get rid of the accent, and that's what triggered that. And he just went about doing what he was doing. He said, I'm just going to be me, and it turned out that the accent became the biggest advantage to him for when he got the Terminator role, because it made him sound that little bit more rigid, and then people accepted it. Is that the process you need to go through? Was that the process you went through as well?
Absolutely, Damien. So I'm fortunate I don't have an accent, but you're right in the sense that I mean I love the Arnold Schwarzenegger one. I'm actually going to steal that one from you because you're right. It's such a good
I'll
example
send you
of
the check,
somebody who's
the bill.
yeah. I love that analogy, and it really displays what I believe as well fundamentally,
Mm,
which is it's the belief we need to change, not the accent. The accent could stay the same. Sundar
yeah.
Pichai has a really thick accent too. The guy runs Google, right? So it's not about the accent and changing that, but rather changing our beliefs around it. Absolutely right.
Yeah. And how did you go about changing that belief? Was it, because is it something that you can do quickly, or does it take time? Do you have to labor at it? Do you have to struggle at it? I'm kind of doing a lot of work in the space of things can be easy if you want them to be. So is there an easier way to do that? Is there an easy way to change the belief, and is there a harder way so that people know what to avoid?
So the answer is both, right? In the
Mm,
sense that when for me it was difficult. It took me years because I didn't really have a system. I didn't really
mm,
know how to go about it or what order and how to go about it. But I believe now that I've learned it, obviously I'm going to teach it today, you can shortcut that growth, which is quite simple. Allow me to explain. So what that means, Damien, is just communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time. So one of those balls is eye contact, one of them is body language, one of them is storytelling, smiling, etc. So for me, the question has simply been, what are the three easiest balls to juggle? Because if you can
mm.
juggle those three balls, you'll build the momentum. But the main purpose behind those exercises isn't necessarily for you to become a master communicator, but for you to destroy the belief that you have internally that you can't be a great speaker. So let's start number one with this exercise. I'll literally tell you what I do with everyone. Exercise number one is the random word exercise. Pick a word like light bulb, doorknob, like ceiling, like home, and create random presentations out of thin air.
Yeah.
And this serves two purposes. One, helps you deal with uncertainty because life is filled with it, right? When you're meeting
Mm,
somebody new at a party, you don't know how that conversation is going to go. You don't even know what questions are going to be asked. You just go with the flow.
yeah.
The other piece is if you can make sense out of nonsense, you can make sense out of anything. But the beauty of the random word exercise, Damien, is if you do it once, you think you can't do it. But if you do it 20 times, you think you could do it 100 times. And that's the magic.
I love that. The random word exercise, you can just pick anything and talk about, whatever it is, and feel that confidence. But is it really about, is it that simple? You say you pick the easy things, and I I love that because you're picking something that you can do very quickly and very simply, and feel confident about because it's easy. And by doing it that multiple times, it becomes, as you say, you build confidence around that. Is that what it takes? Is that the trigger, the roller coaster, and something when you look back at your life, going back, okay, if you did that, from the beginning, would it have been an easier process, do you think?
1000%. And let me explain it in more common sense words, because that's what works with every skill.
Yeah.
Think about it when you learn to ride a bike. You
Mhm.
didn't start with the two-wheeler right away, unless you guys are crazy in Australia, but I definitely did because I'm scared out of my wits of driving two wheels. So I had four,
Yeah.
and then I got really good with four. I was like, yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm like an 8-year-old kid. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And then I took off the two. My parents took off the other two, and I was like, but I had that confidence that I built from four wheels. Like, well, at least I know how to ride the bike.
Yeah.
And eventually I made it work. And that applies for everything. Cooking, we don't just go with something really hard. We start with an easy dish. Oh, okay, what's easy? And then we build our
Mm.
way up. But we don't apply that same rationale to communication. And I believe the reason is simply because before me, I don't feel anyone really gave that structure. They would say a
Mm.
lot of generalisms around communication. Okay, be yourself, picture everyone in their underwear, be confident. And I would look at this and I was like, okay, but where's the order? Whereas me, it's very structured. It's
Yeah.
like, have you done the random word exercise 100 times? Yes or no? It's a binary answer. Not well. We don't
Mm.
get points for doing it well. You don't get
Yes.
points for doing my game well. You get points for doing the game a lot. And everyone always goes no. And I go, first thing I want you to do it 100 times. In 100% of cases, Damien, not
Mm.
90, not 95, in 100% of cases, if somebody does it 100 times, they'll come back and say, yep, I'm a lot better than the first time.
I love that because from my perspective, I'm a big believer that life is easy, and it's relative to your experience, depending on what things are. But most things are pretty simple, and it's a matter of doing the exercises or doing that little bits of things. Like you say, there's three easy balls to juggle. Pick out of the 20, pick the easy ones, do them. And I put that in context as to what I mean. I was having that conversation with my son's karate sensei. He's a seventh Dan black belt, and we're talking about, things are hard. And I said, well, it's relative to your experience. You're a seventh Dan black belt. If I was to ask you to do a grading at yellow belt standard, how hard would that be for you? And he goes, oh, I'd smash it. And I'm going, well, that's right. It's not the exercise is hard. It's relative to your experience. And is that the case from your perspective, what you're teaching people with let's get the easy balls, things that are, to your experience, are relatively easy? You know what a doorknob is. You know what, things that kind of stuff. And you can just pick, hey, there's a doorknob. Let me talk about that for a little bit. And also giving yourself a break that you can fluff it up, that it's okay to mess it up.
Absolutely. The only extra layer I'd add on top, and it's very small, is to let the person get to that result on their own. So I'll give you an example. The most powerful question I ask people that I help get the transformation, anyone could just ask themselves this question, frankly, is what else is possible with their communication skills? So
Mm.
they'll start and they'll go, well, I can't do this once, Brenda. I mean, how am I supposed to pick a word and create a presentation? Then I don't have time to prepare for this. Like, give me like 15 minutes or else I won't. And I go, no, you're going to do it right now. And then they do it, and then they're able to do it, and they go, well, it wasn't that good. Well, I said, well, you said before you couldn't even do it at all, right? And then they go, yes. And I go, perfect. What else do you think is possible through communication? They go,
Yeah.
well, I guess I could do 10 more. I was like, do 10 more. Then they do 10 more. They get really good really fast. Then after they're like, yeah, I'm kind of comfortable. And I go, okay, what else is possible with their communication skills? They go,
Yeah.
let me do 100. I say, cool, do 100 this week. They go, what? I go, yeah, do 100 this week. And then they do 100. And then the last step, what else is possible with their communication skills? And they'll always answer anything.
Yeah.
And that's really the point.
I love that. And is it too from your experience? Because a lot of people look at professional speakers and they go, oh, wow, they just stand up on stage and deliver this half an hour speech. And I think what they may not realize is that if you're watching that person one time, it's a really fabulous speech. Then if you follow that person, it's still a fabulous speech, But it's the same speech. They've been doing the same speech. They tweak a little bit to suit the audience, but really it's the same speech over and over again. Because one of the things I've done is I used to read lots and lots of books, and I wasn't integrating a lot of it. So then I switched and went, I'm picking one book and I'm making sure that I'm doing what's in the book before I move on to the next one. But I started doing that with watching public speakers, and then I kind of got, that was an eye opener for me, because I'm going, that's the same speech, and it started to get boring because it was the same speech. And is that something to help people be aware of with public speaking? Is when you're looking at professional speakers, they're pretty much they have a signature speech that they pretty much repeat for everybody with a few minor adaptations. Does that help people reframe their confidence around speaking?
For sure, Damien, and I'm example number one of this. I'm guilty of that too. I literally present the same thing to every company I speak at, the same topic, even on a podcast. Unless the interviewer asks me something like really witty that's out of the box, which doesn't generally happen, I find myself repeating the same thing over and over again. But that's actually a good thing. That's the only thing I would change in your approach, and I think you see it as a good thing too. But the reason is
Correct.
because that's what we want from Tony Robbins. You know,
Yeah.
and I pay for a Tony Robbins ticket and I go to Unleash the Power Within, I go to his event. I don't want him to come up to me, Damien, and say, hey, Brenden, I wanted to do something special for you. Let's make this whole 3 days about porcupines instead of personal growth. What do you think? I would say, no, Tony, absolutely not. I just spent 3 days taking vacation, spending $1,000, flying to this city. I want you to do the same thing that you did for everyone else. Please, could you do that?
Yeah.
Because that's what I paid for. So that's really the key, is we actually want people to do that, and that's the expectation, which makes our life a lot easier too.
Yeah, exactly. And that wasn't the point. It was more for people having confidence around speaking, realizing that when they're looking at someone, and we should never compare to other people anyway. We should always compare to ourselves. But a lot of times people look at someone who's a great speaker and go, oh man, they're so wonderful, but not realizing the whole journey. And this has been a process, as you said, repeating it 100 times. When you do that 100 times, it becomes really, really, really easy. What about from the perspective, if we still stay in that Wayback Machine, about not knowing the language? I mean, what was that process? You've obviously had to go through, and you learnt French. That wasn't the original language you speak, so I'm guessing there's 3 languages in there that, at a minimum, that you know now. I struggle with English, and I'm proud of that. I own that. It's my signature. English is my second language. I don't know what my first is though. And so from that side of things, how did you make that adjustment? Again, coming to this confidence thing, and from what I've seen with people speaking, it's more about confidence than skill, because people generally, if you in a relaxed environment, in your environment you feel comfortable, people they speak normally. That's what they do. How did you get that confidence to go, okay, I'm speaking French, but now I need to speak English as well? How did you make that transition?
For sure, Damien. So 2 parts to that. One part that I actually wanted to bring up before, that I just remembered, is the idea of how versus wow. So a lot of people, when they look at people in general, they always go, wow, this person's so great. Wow, 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 this guy's amazing. Whereas my frame on this is switch the wow for how. How did that person actually get there? How did that person actually become successful? And that's how we transition in the same way you did, from wow to, wait a second, they're delivering the same thing over and over again. I could do that too, to the how. But don't just apply that to speaking. Apply that to every person you admire.
Yes.
And the way that you do this is by writing a list. I get people to do this all the time, of one person you really admire. You're like, oh my God, I wouldn't even be in the same room as them. It'd freak him out. For me, it's like a Justin Bieber. Just to be a little playful here. Like, I love Justin Bieber. But then the frame becomes... It's okay. I love him. He's so good.
I'm a romantic too. I can cry in movies. It's okay.
There you go. So the frame, though, behind, let's say, it could be anybody, Barack Obama, I pick anybody. But the frame is, if that guy was your friend or that girl was your friend and asked you for advice and feedback on how they could do better, what advice would you give them? And it forces the individual to put themselves in the shoes of their admirers as colleagues instead of just fans, and it levels up your mindset over time. So quick note on that. In terms of the question around the languages, the reason I didn't struggle too much with it, thankfully for me, was because I was really young. So
Mm.
obviously, I speak three languages: English, French, and Tamil. The reason I can speak English is because I went to a daycare when I was 2 or 3 years old, Damien, and I learned English there really rapidly. But I never formally studied in it until I was in college. But French, what I will say is, I struggled a lot, mostly on the grammar side and the writing, the written part,
Mm.
because the grammar is really difficult. So I was failing French until grade 8.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of struggles around there. But honestly, even native speakers of the French language were failing French too. So
As soon as you
not too
started to
bad.
master it, you had more success with the ladies. Was that it? And you'd speak the language?
It's funny. No, so this is true, but not in Montreal, outside
Okay.
of the city. So if I'm in like in Australia and I
Yes.
start speaking French, I mean, both of them would go crazy. Men and women would go
Yep.
crazy. Frankly, they go, "Oh my
Exactly.
god!" Like you're like, "Is this guy from France?"
It's funny wherever you go, people have, it's the language. I know whenever I've traveled to, I think it's over 44 countries I've traveled to, and wherever it is, it's like, oh, you've got such a great accent. It's like, do I? It's like, I just think it's normal. Um, but it's funny wherever you go, people notice those differences, which is, I think it's really exciting that people have uh, observed those things. But I want to come back to this learning because you said you were younger, so you were able to learn that faster. Now, and you do a lot with teaching and helping people learn. One of the things I really, I mean, because people say, "Oh, kids learn faster," which to me, from my experience, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's correct. I think it's an experience people have, and I'm going to relay that to when I was getting my motorbike license, and I'd ridden a motorbike for forever. And no one can tell when you've got a helmet on how old you are. So I was riding one when I was younger. I was in a country town, and we could go from town to town, no problem. But then when I was older, I was getting my license, and the instructor talked about how the older people are more like, because riding a bike is dangerous, obviously, but the older people were more likely to survive or not be involved in accidents and things like that because of the life experience they brought to it. They were aware from having driven a car or other things to be more alert. Just general life experiences made them more likely to be safer in their riding. And that's where I wonder, from the perspective of an adult, is is this ability to learn, is it because that we've shut down and we know things, whereas a kid, they don't know, so they're open to it? Is that, from your teaching experience, is that possible as well? It's my experience, but I'm just wondering whether I'm a freak because I look at things and go, I don't know. I relax, allow my unconscious to take it in, and I learn very quickly. And I'll get into unconscious and conscious behavior and knowing shortly. But from your experience, is it possible for adults to learn fast as well?
Absolutely. So here's what I'll say at the beginning. An interesting story, by the way, around the motorcycle that does make sense to me from a common sense perspective.
Yeah.
There's definitely some skills that come easy to us as children. Like languages is much harder to learn when you get older than as
Mm.
kids. Like that's just undeniable. Like it just because of the nature of how we absorb information. But in general, when it comes to skill sets, I think it's more important to think about the mindset. So
Mm.
I'll give you a quote from the movie Yes Man, which I
Mm.
love. And the quote is, "The world is our playground. We understand that as kids, but somewhere along the way we forget that it is." So when we're kids, we absorb a lot of information. We're a lot more open-minded because we don't understand the realities of the world. So
Mm.
for example, the random word exercise, children are such a great teacher for us. Because whenever I tell an adult to do the random word exercise, they go, "Well, this is childish. Why do I need to do this? This has nothing to do with work." They always bring the judgment to it. I mean, not the people I work with privately, but people in general that hear that tip. But kids, if you give your son, your daughter, your niece, your nephew the same exercise and they're 7 years old, they don't sit down and go, "Hey, dad, let's have a 30-minute conversation of whether or not I should be doing this exercise or not." They just
Mm.
go, "Oh, bacon? So my mom gave me bacon this morning and it was like breakfast and I love breakfast and it's so cool." And they just go for it. They don't really
Yeah.
care about that. So my belief is that that mindset can absolutely be learned, but it's
Mm.
one that you need to be conscious of, because if you're unconscious to it, you'll fall into the same frame that most of us do, which is comply, do what everyone else expects you to do, especially as you find more success in your life as you get older. So it takes work to stay a kid.
Mm.
from a certain perspective. And that's why I'm not going to say you're a freak, but that's why you're the exception rather, because you kept that
I can be a freak.
perspective. But you've kept that, right, that mindset. That's why you're always learning. Gary Vaynerchuk's another great example of someone who's always stayed that way. Tim
Mm.
Urban as well, the founder of Wait But Why. But we don't have to be freaks. I think we're all freaks in some ways because we're all
Mm.
unique, we're all weird. So let's just
Yeah.
embrace that and just keep learning.
I love that what you mentioned there about being the world is your playground. And from that perspective, as you say, it's a mindset. And I was just wondering too, with that, how much do you think listening connects to the learning process? And I'll relay that back to the language side of things. A while ago, when I was dating, I dated some women that spoke other languages than English, and so I would learn the language, and I learned very fast, but largely I think because they're always surprising, you speak it so well, and I never maintained it because I stopped seeing them, so what's the point? But so I'm not,
So just so we know, what languages are these? Could you just list them all out for us?
there was Chinese, Vietnamese, Italian, what was it? Forgotten now. Anyway, it's not as Einstein said. Why remember anything you can look up? So if I went back through photos, I'm sure I could remember what they were. So
I was just making a joke, David. It would have been funny if you had went through like 30 different languages and people go, "Well, I guess you've been with a lot of different people."
there was a few, but anyway, we won't go there. That's another story. That's got more to do with creating rapport than it does to do with learning languages. But the question I was coming back to with that was I really paid attention to listening how the different words were structured in the sounding of that, and I repeated that, and I wonder how much of this learning process that we have comes down to the actual ability to let go and listen. Because I find most of the times, and I was really, really guilty of this when I was younger, is like I knew everything. You couldn't tell me anything. So as much as I could, and I learned stuff, but if someone told me, I was like, I know that, piss off. And but then later a bit of maturity kicked in, and the learning process accelerated a lot when I was actually listening, and not just listening from the perspective of, okay, what are they saying, but really listening to what the person has said and their body language and things like that. So in the listening, I was letting go of who I am in part to allow that information in. How much do you think that affects the learning process, and can it speed it up by actually really listening?
For sure, Damien, it's a fantastic question. There's a couple layers to that. The first one is I got from one of my mentors, Steve Hardison. He says it so well. He says, are we listening for the judgment or are we listening for the gold? And a lot of us, unfortunately, like our younger selves, I won't even say you, all of us were like that as younger people, where we're always listening for the judgment. Oh, I already know this. Oh, what does this person know? Oh, I'm smarter than them. Instead of listening for the gold, which is I might disagree with them on many things, but there's one thing that this person can teach me that I don't know. Let me find what that gold is. And when you have that perspective, completely changes the way you listen. But the other piece is practical ideas on how we actually listen more effectively. So many of us, Damien, we say listening is important, but we never really give each other like tips on this is actually how you listen better. So let me give you one thought here on how to do this that gets people results like literally the next day. All you have to do is pick somebody you really admire in your life, somebody you already know, who ideally might be even listening to this podcast with you. You both are both growth minded. You're both awesome. You love talking to each other and you love supporting each other. All you have to do is book a one-on-one call with them.
Yeah.
And I call this the goals call. So it's a 45-minute call where one person listens to the other for 45 minutes. And this is the structure. The structure is one person asks the other, what are your 3 most important goals this year? And why are those goals important to you? So they spend 2 minutes, they write those 3 goals, they tell you why it's important. But during the entirety of the call, you only are allowed to do 2 things. One, you're allowed to restate what they're saying. So what I heard was this, Damien. Did I get that correctly? And the other thing is you're allowed to ask questions around their goals. So if somebody goes, I want to lose weight, you respond with, how much weight? By how long? So you just ask questions. And the third piece is a rule. You are not allowed during the entirety of the call to give feedback or coaching to the other individual. You're only allowed to restate, listen, and ask them questions. And this exponentially improves people's ability to listen.
I love that exercise. And it's amazing how much time we spend actually thinking about what we're going to say next and what we're doing as opposed to really listening. And what you said, there's a 45-minute call. I love, obviously, at the moment you've got the war in Ukraine, and there's a lot of press on that. But I love there was a discussion where they were talking about Barack Obama when he met Putin. And they said when they first met, Barack Obama actually sat there and listened, did not say a word for 55 minutes while Putin talked. He just sat there and listened, which is, I think that's an impressive feat, but probably why he was such a, great at what he did, because he had that capacity to listen. With that as well, in that integration and learning process, because there's a difference between consciously knowing and unconsciously acting. And my background includes military. We did a lot of drills and training so that we just react. From that process as well, because we've all had that experience where we've thought, we thought we understood it, we've gone and done it and fluffed it up monumentally and gone, oh, what happened there? Because I thought I knew it. And then we've had that other experience where we've thought we didn't know it and surprised ourselves how well we've done, which highlights the difference between consciously knowing and unconsciously acting, because acting is an unconscious action. If you try to pick up a cup off the table, simple as that, you can't consciously do that. You cannot consciously think of every muscle you got to move. All you do is you think about the outcome and allow things to happen. From that perspective, in the learning environment that you deal with, how much does that play a part in allowing people to learn, to allow that, okay, how do we get this to an unconscious state, which you talked about the drills that you do, which helps fill that through. But how much do you find that people allowing themselves to relax and work their way into that helps that process?
For sure, Damien. It's a fascinating question. Here's the way I would approach it is everything always becomes consciously for me, besides the limiting beliefs we have around speaking. So that the exercises that we work on begin at the conscious level, but eventually hit our unconscious. But what I mean by that is in the context of our willingness and our ability to speak. Let me give a simple example or else it'll get too complicated. So let's say we think about the random word exercise. So what I like to say, Damien, is that communication is a multiplier effect, meaning that if I do the random word exercise 100 times, it is not just about doing the random word exercise 100 times. The next time you go up to somebody at a bar or at a party, it'll be much easier for you to make small talk with that person because you practice avocado and toaster and basement. So, but obviously when you talk to people, it's not that hard. Like, where are you from? What are you up to in your life? Like, it's just those basic questions. So small talk becomes easier to you, but you're not thinking about the random word exercise when you're doing small talk. You just worked on speaking on the cusp so many times that it's just easier for you to have great conversation. That's one example of how the conscious transfers into the unconscious where you don't think about it anymore. Same thing with question drills that we haven't talked about yet that I'll bring up, which is an exercise where you write down a question to something that somebody's going to ask you. So when I started guesting on podcasts, I sucked, for lack of a better word. I remember some guy asked me, where does the fear of communication come from? And I looked at him and I said, I don't know, dude. Sydney? London? You tell me. Like, I don't know. So I was reactive. So what did I do instead? I just became more proactive every day for 5 minutes. That's it, David. I just answered one question about speaking. But if you do that for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions about your industry. Yeah. And that's amazing. You'll be bulletproof. But that also becomes unconscious when you go back to real life. When somebody asks you a question like, how's your day? Or what's the biggest lesson you learned about yourself? You'll never be stuck because you just answer so many questions on a day-to-day basis. That'll be easier for you to answer them and you won't even think about the question drill. So that's my thought.
Yeah, because you have a number of drills, which is really good, that help people. One of the drills that you have is silence. And for me, that stood out because in the negotiation program they have Negotiation Magic, one of the sources of power is silence. And people know this from sales as well. When you sell, when you close, you shut up. The next person to speak is the person that's going to get the sale. And then if you speak next, if you're the salesperson, you've lost the sale. From a silence perspective, I mean, how important is silence in public speaking and being able to control that? And what is the underlying purpose of silence from your perspective as well?
Absolutely. So for me, Damien, pausing is a tool. Silence is a tool that a lot of us don't know well. But if you
Mm,
know how to use the tool, you can leverage it really effectively. And I would agree it's the most important one in communication in general.
mm,
So, why is it important? We all have that friend that tells us a story that has no ending. Hey, Damon, yesterday I was doing this and this and this and this. And then you're just like, this and this and this. And so, where are we going here? And it's
yeah,
20 minutes later and we're still going. And you're
yes.
thinking, how do I get out of this conversation? So, but when you pause, what happens is you draw your audience in. Hey, Damon, you wouldn't believe what happened yesterday. And then you're thinking, the dude's pausing. What happened yesterday? What
Mm,
happened? So you're real versus going, hey, you wouldn't believe what happened yesterday. This is what happened. This is what happened. You're like, oh, I don't want to listen to this.
yeah.
So pausing is strategic, where we choose moments of our life, moments in our stories, moments in our shares where we learn to pause so that we reel people in and that where
Mm.
people remember, okay, if Brendan's pausing, it's a signal in my brain to tell me that what he's about to say next is probably the most important part of this presentation. And that's the key.
Yeah, I love that. So you're creating that drama within the communication as well. The other one that I like and stood out for me as one of the exercises you do is you talk about um, gazing or staring into the other person's eyes, and that stood out for me because it was something that I read about Steve Jobs as well, where when he was younger, when he was off in, I think it was India or wherever he was, went for this trip, and him and the guy that he went with, they'd actually practiced just staring into each other's eyes, and it became very powerful from a perspective of his ability to influence other people in a business sense. And also, too, I mean, from that side of things, that connection through the eyes, if you're having an intimate moment with your partner, when you're in that heat of passion, if you're looking into each other's eyes, it creates an even more greater intensity. What do you think works for that? Why do you think that works? Why is this looking to each other's eyes so important? And how do we train ourselves to do that?
For sure, Damien. So there's a couple of thoughts on the endless key. That's why I don't bring it up a lot because I know on a podcast because I know most people won't implement it. But since you
Yeah.
did bring it up, here's what I'll say. The first thing is, and we'll get into the relationships part, but the biggest thing is it helps us practice pausing for longer periods of time.
Yeah.
So if you can stare into somebody's eyes, like a loved one, somebody that you like, somebody in your friendship, it doesn't matter, and you stare at them for 3 minutes straight without saying a word, it's
Mm.
really easy for you to pause in a normal presentation or conversation for 2 to 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Like if I can pause for 2 to 3 minutes, I could do 2 to 3 seconds. The other piece is the reason it increases the intimacy between individuals, and that could be a friendship, that could be a romantic relationship, is because a lot of us crave attention as human beings. And because of phones, but even before the phone, this was a thing anyways, where
Yeah.
people wouldn't look at each other, they wouldn't be present with them. So when you are sitting down in front of somebody and you're giving them your undivided attention, you're not saying a word, you're staring into their eyes, it's very shocking and emotional to most human beings because they've never felt that in their entire lives. That's why it creates such a visceral response into people. And that's what we find always. I do this a lot. I go easy on my clients. I make them do it for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's good, but it's like they go, oh my God, this is amazing, but they're not bawling. If you do this for 10 minutes, people start crying and it becomes, and I don't want to manage that stuff. So don't do this for 10 minutes, folks. Just for 3. Let the life coach say do it for 10 minutes, but I'll say do it for 3.
Because it's a fascinating thing that really connects at a deep level when you're looking at someone into their eyes. It opens something up, and I haven't worked out exactly what it is, but like you say, it's very visceral. It really creates this deep connection. What do you think it is underneath that allows us to connect on that level when you're looking someone in the eyes?
I wish I had the perfect answer, Damien. I think what I'll say, my educated guess, is it makes us feel seen, heard, and understood. Because a
Mm,
lot of the times in our relationships, not just romantic, really in general, when we tell somebody, "Hey, Damon, did you see this?" or "Hey, Brendan, did you say that?" we might get an acknowledgement. No, but it's very rare where somebody goes up and go, "Hey, thanks for sharing that." Damon,
mm,
you're right. So where you get usually it's just like, oh yeah, good point, and then they go back to their phone or something else, and you're almost like a distraction for people, and it's very subtle, right?
mm,
It's very subtle. Whereas I think with the eye gazing, it's like, no, I'm choosing you. I'm
Mm.
choosing to give you 100% of my attention. And I think that's so powerful. And we don't need to do this with ourselves necessarily for intimidated, but what I would encourage your audience to do and implore them to think about is at least do this with your children, because children really
Mm.
need that when they're kids, when they're young. Like I see this all the time with parents, even if I don't have kids yet, but I do this with kids I coach or just people in general or my nieces and nephews, is I'm very conscious that when I'm around a 10-year-old or a 7-year-old, that when they say something to me, because it's really easy to ignore them, but when they see something to me, I acknowledge them and I say, hey, Bill or Tom or Julia, thanks for sharing that. And I'm always looking at them in the eyes when I'm talking to them, because kids are very fragile with their emotions. So if you don't give them that attention when
Mm.
they're looking for it, they'll react in not so great ways, and they'll feel a little bit hurt. So I think it's important for us. But I think as adults, that's also true, but we've learned to kind of deal with it, even if we crave it.
Yeah, I love that, especially with kids. It's if yeah, they are looking for that attention and looking them in the eyes when you talk. I know from my experience as a parent, creating that connection wasn't difficult at all, and it avoided all the negative behaviors to get attention, because really that's what they want. But on that side of things, though, and because it seems to me that this is a really, and you use the word visceral, but and maybe staying with that, it's such a deep response, such a strong response. Yet in some cultures, it's the opposite. It's like, don't look in people's eyes, but it seems to be a biological reaction that you are going to get that connection. You go, if you stare at someone in the eyes, it's going to happen. There's nothing you can do about that. What do you think it is that led to some cultures doing the opposite, saying, oh, they have this culture where they don't look in people's eyes?
I mean, once again, you're asking me a lot of tough questions today. I wouldn't know culturally why that is, but
Got
I
to
think
break
what
you
I
off your script.
yeah, yeah, I know you're doing a great job breaking off my script. Uh, So, I mean, I think what I would say is the only idea I have around this is the idea of individualism versus collectivism. So a lot of the point that you drove, Damien,
Mm,
around why people don't look at themselves in their eyes, that's mostly true in Asian cultures.
yeah,
Like in my
correct.
culture, women generally, not always, I mean, I don't want to generalize, but it's you never always want to look at people directly for too long,
Yeah.
because it might be seen as offensive, because once again you have
Mm,
that shocking visceral reaction,
yeah.
right? And when women get
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
married too, in like Muslim
Yeah.
culture, this is also very apparent, where the woman is always looking down, is never really looking directly, and
Mhm.
that's for very different reasons, right? Like some of it, and once again, I'm not an expert in this area, but some of it is to not induce desire within other men. That's
Mm,
one. Another reason is it's just a sign of respect. I don't know what the roots of that are,
mm.
but yeah, I think it's interesting. I definitely think it's interesting for sure.
That's a fascinating points that you've raised up there, because it does, again, it creates that visceral connection, and yeah, maybe that is, the reasons behind why that was the case, to not have that, that level of intimacy with people that you're not immediately connected with. It's a fascinating, or to me, it's a fascinating train of thought to explore that and go, where did that come from? Yeah. What I wanted to also talk about was, let's go back to, personal development and where we sit in life and comparing ourselves to others. And I'm going to draw an experience here, because I'm, with the house that, beach house that I'm at the moment. I like my lawn, and I spend a lot of time making it nice, and it's not quite where I want to be, but I like it. Gone through and did the weed thing and leveling it out, and I just spend my time,
Wow.
and I've actually turned, I know, I speak to a lot of people, so I'm actually, for my solitary, I used to have, gardeners and things like that, but I actually now have a ride on, not a ride on, a self-propelled mower. I've turned into a Forrest Gump, where I'm just going backwards and forwards on the lawn, because it's my solitary. I enjoy that. No music, no headphones or anything, just going up and down the lawn, and it's a big lawn in a little mower, so it keeps giving me, gives me that time to be by myself. But what I noticed, because I've got a pathway that goes down the side of my house as well, and a lot of people walk past there, and I know the neighbors. But one of the neighbors said to me, he says, "Man, you've just got the best lawn in the neighborhood." And I was like, Really? I've never looked. I literally, until he'd said that, I'd never noticed other people's lawns. I was just doing it because I like to do it. And that's what was my space. And I enjoyed that. After that, I looked and went, yeah, I do actually. Um, but I'm wondering from that perspective as a learning and self-development thing, I was very lucky growing up because my mum always, and I hated it as a kid, but she said, doesn't matter what other people think. And I go, yes, it does, as a kid. But, as an adult, I'm like, I don't care what other people think. I'm doing things because I like it. How much of that from that learning process and this process of speaking is getting into the space? I did that last night, for example. I was at a speaking event, and when I first got up to speak, I fluffed it up, and I was not confident. And I sat down before I got up again because I was hosting the event, and I just said, "Hang on a minute. You just need to be confident, switch that on, own your space. Doesn't matter what anyone else thinks." How important do you think that is, not just from a speaking perspective, but from a life perspective, of owning your own space, of being your own person, regardless of what anyone else thinks? And how does someone learn to do that if they're not?
Your questions are next level, Damien. You just compared like lawns and lawnmowers, and you told a story about a neighborhood. Then you went into a speech, and then you're like, "So, Brenden, given all of this context, how do you see the future going with?" I was like, "Whoa, this dude is like, you could give like a master class on how to craft questions. It's like art." As I'm
Thank
listening,
you.
are you writing these questions, or are they just coming kind of in the spur of the moment?
I make some notes as we're talking of things that you've said, but yeah, they're pretty much coming in the moment. So
You're a magical man. I see why they call you the magic negotiator. It makes sense. There's some magic going on here. But yes, I mean, you're right. The fear of judgment really gets in the way of people's success, right?
mm,
Bronnie Ware in her book, The Seven Regrets of the Dying, she always says, or was it five? But anyways, The Regrets of the Dying, she says that the number one regret that we have as human beings is that we lived our life based on the expectation of others rather than the expectations of ourselves. And
mm,
that is the number one. The context behind the book, for those who don't know, she's actually from Australia, is the context is she was a nurse. She worked as a nurse, and she'd see a lot of people die, like go into
mm.
the next stage of life, and she would listen to all their stories because they had like 2 months left, and she was the only person they talked to. And they always go with, "I wish, I wish, I wish I could have had a better relationship with my daughter. I wish I could have done this."
Yeah,
And I think how that applies to both speaking in life, Damien, is a realization that people will forget you after
yeah,
you're dead. Eventually. Whether it's in 10 years, whether it's in 100 years, whether it's in 1,000, eventually people will forget about you.
mm,
And a lot of people think that's a bad thing. And I think in many ways that's a gift.
mm.
And the gift means that if people are going to forget you anyways, they're probably not thinking about what you're doing right now either. They're
Exactly.
probably not thinking about how you're living your life right now either.
Yeah,
So for me, the thesis of how I lived my life is learn from the people you admire. The people that we admire went against the grain. The
yeah,
actors that we look up to in movies that we watch all the time. The person that we look up to as a mentor who went across all the challenges, all the adversities. They actually followed what I describe as the path of insanity rather than the path of sameness. Because if we want to be the same, that's totally fine. But I'd rather be insane. That's why I say be insane or be the same. But I think the
I love it.
the bottom line, right,
Yeah,
is that we look at the people we admire, we clap for them at the Oscars, we cheer them on at the Grammys, but we
mm,
don't realize, going back to wow versus how, that if I
mm,
actually want to be the person on that stage, I need to actually live my life in the exact opposite of how I'm currently living it today.
mm.
Because the people on that stage, and I'm not saying you need to want to be on that stage, the
Yeah,
person you admire has literally lived life completely differently than yours. So you need to first acknowledge that and realize that the only way I'm going to be great is by actually quitting my six-figure job or by quitting something and actually realizing that my true passion in life is actually mowing the lawn and really enjoying that process. Or it's starting a stupid YouTube channel, not on music, but on public speaking tips. Like, what kind of stupid idea is that? Who's going to do that? And that person ended up being me. So, yeah, just embrace your insanity would be the tip here.
Yeah, I love that where you're talking about embrace that stupid idea and being if you're going to be great, you mentioned that. There was a couple of things that because one thing I've heard it was stated was if you do what everyone else does, the best you can hope to be is average. And I'm linking this to the part because I had on my desk when I was very young or younger a statement that said, "Don't go where the path may lead, go instead where there's no path and leave a trail." And I'm wondering about looking at this to be, you look at people you admire and wanting to be that person. You want to be the next Tony Robbins. You mentioned Tony Robbins before. You want to be the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos or whatever, Mary Barra, whatever that is, and you're aspiring to be that person. And I'm wondering, and I can't remember where that shifted for me, but it was very, very early on. I shifted and said, I don't want to be like these people. I want to be the Damian Andrews. That was it. It was like, I'm going to be the Damian. And maybe it was because of what my mum had said when I was younger about not doesn't matter what other people think, be your own person, do what's right for you. And so I'm just wondering from that perspective of achieving success, how much of it is, because I know from my perspective, I'm happy every day. I don't have a bad day ever. I have exciting day every day when I go to bed. I'm having an exciting day, and that's before I'm with my partner. So it's like my days are and because I look at it and go, look, I've done this, I've done that, and it was all stuff that I'd set up that I want to do. I set my day up to be successful every day in my mind. I don't know what anyone else thinks, and I don't care. But how important is that to? I know for me, I said for me, it was really. I don't remember when it happened, but for a very, very long time, it's always been I'm going to be the Damian Andrews, and that was it. I don't care what anybody else does. It's not comparing to anybody else's level of success. It's what's right for me. Um, do you think it's detrimental to stay focused on, aspiring to be like someone else, or is it better to be focused on what it is just right for you, stay in that mode, and then and how do we do that?
Yeah, Damien. The truth is always great, right?
Mm,
Because the answer is never one or the other for me anyways, and I
yeah.
feel you're that way too with your super cool and nuanced questions, is the answer is both. So I
Mm,
would argue, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I think the reason why you're happy all the time is because you're living life exactly how you want to live it. Okay, I want to do my lawn. Like I don't give a shit about the lawn. If you looked at my lawn, you'd be horrified. You're like, I'm never going to be friends with you, Brendan. Like you are, this is a mess. But for you, that's important. So
mm,
you go, this is what's important to me. I don't care what other people think. I'm going to live it this way. But that's why you're overjoyous because you're doing the life, you're living the life that you
mm,
want to live. But I think that where I draw the balance is how do you draw the balance between the person you admire versus the person you want to be? So here's
mm,
what I think. I think when it comes to people we admire, comparison, in my opinion, is not necessarily always the thief of joy. It's a tool that most people don't know how to use correctly.
yeah.
So a lot of people we compare the wrong things. So we look at like a Kim Kardashian or something. No hate against her. I'm just using it as a placeholder. And
Yeah.
we go, oh my God, she has big houses, all living her life. And we're comparing, oh my God, I don't have that. My life sucks. And we're using comparison the wrong way versus comparing ourselves to the people we want to be. So I'm the opposite to you. I really want to be like those people. Not like Kim, but more like Tony Robbins, more like
Yeah.
Brene Brown, more like. So what I do is when I look at them, I don't see their success as a threat, though some of part of my ego might.
Mm,
Most of it is me looking at it and saying, what can I learn from these people? Okay, it took Gary Vee 10 years of creating content to get there. So if I'm not willing to do that, I shouldn't be doing that for a living. So
mm,
when I'm doing that as I'm using comparison in the right way. But then the other part of that equation is also, to your point, an acknowledgement of who we don't want to be. So let's say if I look at Tiger Woods' life, he's like a
yeah.
professional golfer and he's successful. I look at it as like, I don't want that dude's life. He's yeah, he's got all the money, but he has a bunch of problems with his family. He's always flying out all the time playing golf. Like I have no interest in doing that. So the exercise serves two purposes, which is balancing who we
Mm,
admire and whose life we're actually excited about living ourselves,
yeah.
and saying what are the steps to actually get there, and finding the medium between that and what we're actually capable of achieving, and finding that middle ground where I think happiness lies. So for me, the answer wasn't go on social media and talk about gratitude and humility and yell at people and swear like Gary Vee does. It was, yeah, I'm going to post on social media. I admire the guy, but I'm actually going to do it my own way, which is
Mm,
communication and public speaking. But the challenge and the exercise, because it's easy for us to say, because it's easy for us to go, yeah, yeah, I don't care what other people think, because we got there. But I
Yeah.
think chapter one of that conversation is saying, I'll challenge your audience today to just take one small weird step towards your insanity. Not the whole way. You don't have to go 0 to 100 like me and Damien here. Just say, okay, what's weird? One weird thing that I do that my family would be surprised by, and it doesn't have to
Mm.
be illegal or anything. It could be something stupid like you put ketchup on your eggs, and you tell people
That's
that.
nice. I like that.
Right, that's cool. I hate that. It drives me crazy. But I accept the people who do that.
Yeah.
Or it could be like get rid of one negative friend in your life and add
Mm.
a new one that's just as weird as you.
Mm.
And then when you start tasting what that life feels like, then you get addicted to it.
Yeah, I love that because I'm just thinking as you were talking about that, and you mentioned about, and I was looking at it using that as the inspiration, and I think it's probably relative as well. But like from when I look at it from my life, I mean, I've flown into Nice, had a private helicopter take me into Monaco, and gone to the casino, had a chauffeur-driven car, and traveled off to Switzerland and done skiing for 2 weeks and shopped in Zurich, and had in chauffeur driven and done that regularly. So for me, it was like I'm going. It's not. I don't need that, and that's not what makes me happy. I was happy first, and then I was able to do all that. And I don't have to do that every day to be happy. I can sit around and do the Forrest Gump up and down on my lawn and be happy. And that's where I was trying to get to, is this thing where we have to be, we're striving to be like someone else to be happy, when the reality is we don't need to do anything to be happy. Our biology is set up that we can be happy instantly. As soon as you start thinking a happy thought, your body immediately starts producing dopamine. So it's just a kind, and you've done Tony Robbins, so I'm assuming you've done Tony Robbins from the mention it, and then from yeah. So and I mean, Tony Robbins talks about if you want to change your state, just sit up straight, and we know that from experience. You hunch over, of course you're going to feel like crap. You sit up straight, and it's good. But even that, you don't even have to do anything. You can actually think a happy thought. Well, it's still an action, but you take a pen, put it between your teeth. Don't let your lips touch the pen. Try not to smile. You're going to smile. And you're going to start feeling happy, producing dopamine. And that's what I was trying to get to with this whole process of being happy. And I know this is a bit longer, and these questions have a bit of depth to it. But I'm coming back to, you talked about at the very beginning about your parents were factory workers, and from that side of things, when you look at your growing up, were you aspiring to be like other people, to break out of that, when you looked at what your parents were doing, going, well, I don't want to do that because that's not happy, or was it a different process for you? Do you want to talk us through that?
For sure, Damien. The answer is a little bit of both. So one part of me was going, I don't need a lot to be happy, and that became a great gift for me. So
Yeah.
when I became a business owner, when I started doing well at my job, all those fun things, I didn't waste all that money. I didn't waste that opportunity because I realized I didn't need to buy a Rolex watch or a BM.
Mm.
Like, it's fine. Like, I have the happiness. So that's a gift, but it's also the double-edged sword, right? Which is like, it also drove me to want to pursue money as a legitimate objective of being in life, because I didn't want to go through the pain that they went through on their day to day.
Yeah.
So it's all about hand picking the experiences that you want to keep, but
Mm.
definitely in the frame of happiness. Growing up with little really taught me that you didn't need a lot to be happy. Like, I'm super happy now. Yeah, sure. If I become the person I want to be even better, obviously, and I'm going to try my wits ass to get there.
Mm.
But it's okay if I don't either. I mean, even in the place that we are now, I mean, my life is amazing. Like, I get just to do what I love. I spend all day just having conversations with people, coaching people, transforming them. What else could I want in my life? I live with my mom and my sister, and life is cool. Like,
That's
that's
awesome.
it.
I love that. So from that side of things as well, when we're talking about, you said, there's things that you want to do and move forward, that kind of thing. Do you think there's easier ways of doing that from because you have a couple of key things to do with public speaking. You say, okay, from a public speaking side of things, do the random word exercise, do that 100 times. Now, for 2 minutes times 100 says 200 minutes. That's not a lot of time in if you're putting that into a week or even a month, you stretch it out to a month. That's not a lot of time within that period to actually achieve that. That's not going to take long. You can do it in a week easily.
Exactly.
And from the other side of things, there's the silence and the staring into people's eyes. Again, not hard instructions. You just need to do it. Do you think from that perspective as well? Excuse me, because I look at life and think life is simple and life is easy if you do the right things. We overcomplicate it and make it harder. Having money, for example, there's 4 rules to having money. One is you got to earn it, so you add value. If you're adding value, you're going to earn money. It's a simple rule. It's not difficult to do. And they talk about that with customers, adding value to the customers, focus on the customers that that are good to work with. I had a client that they were a plumbing business and they were turning over 15 million. The guy, the three brothers, 3 brothers? I think they were brothers. Can't remember now. It was a while ago. But they were working flat out, 7 days a week, lots of struggle. They were making some money, but it wasn't great especially for a $15 million turnover business. They decided we're not doing this anymore. We're gonna cut all of the crappy customers, and so that revenue dropped by a third. They went from 15 to $10 million. Yes, they had more time as well. So they, instead of working 7 days a week, they were working 5 days a week, and having quality time with their family on the weekend. The thing was, their profit went up, because they weren't dealing with all the crap stuff. And so this is what I say, earning money is very simple. It's, add value and focus on the quality customers. And then to have wealth, I mean, George S. Carlson wrote about this. I'm sure you've heard of or read the book, The Richest Man in Babylon. Keep a bit of what you earn, invest that, and reinvest the returns on that. Warren Buffett talks about that. And that's the power of compound interest, Einstein's 8th wonder of the world. So when I look at, and I use money because it's something people can relate to, as life is pretty simple. Do you think from your perspective as well that, because it sounds like your instructions for teaching people to speak publicly are fairly simple and it's just a matter of doing it? Another analogy I use is a person goes to the doctor and says, Doc, I've got this pain in my fingers every now and then. I just get this pain. And the doctor says, oh, really? Look, it seems fine. Yeah, it's not now, but every now and then. And the doctor says, well, what are you doing when you get that? And he says, well, I'm getting in the car and I leave my finger in the door jamb and shut the door. And the doctor says, well, just stop doing that. And it's how many times do we look at life and people, from your experience of dealing with people, how many times have you dealt with people in public speaking where you've said, here's a simple set of instructions, just go and do that, and they don't do that? And if they did do it, things would change. And well, I'm sure they eventually do it, and they go, oh, wow, this is so easy. So from that, I know this is a long description there, but can we shorten this process and make life easy, do you think?
Don't worry, Damien. I got used to them. I love your questions, honestly. So for me, the game is, Richard Feynman says it best. He says the greatest teachers are able to take complex subjects and make them really simple for other people to understand. Because if you don't have that skill set, you probably don't really understand it that well yourself. So for me, the pursuit, and it's a life's pursuit, I haven't gotten there yet, is to try and make communication as simple to understand as possible to, in fact, shortcut that learning. So in the context of how I teach it, that is the goal. I haven't achieved that. It's not a destination, a journey, but definitely over the years, I've simplified it quite a bit. Because at the beginning, it was like, do this speech and this content and this. Whereas now it's like, yeah, just do the random word exercise a few times a day, send a couple of video messages to people that you love, answer a question every day, and let's build that momentum over time.
Yeah.
So there's that piece, right? Is how do we simplify knowledge in a way where other people can impact from it and other people can learn from it and grow from it? That's one piece. And then the other piece is going, you know what? Some things might be a little challenging about life, but communication is threefold, and we only focus on one. One is how do we get people to listen to our ideas, but we don't focus on the two other ones, which are, how do we get people to take action on our ideas? And how do we get people to share our ideas with other people? And those two components are more important than just the first. Because if people just listen to you, but they don't take action, they don't share, there's no impact.
Yeah.
So part of the work that we do, or really in any work that you do as somebody wants to make a difference in the education space, is you need to ask yourself, are people actually implementing what I'm saying? And if the answer is no, how do I change the message differently? That's why in this whole conversation, you'll notice, Damien, I didn't really give 15, 20 different tips here. I keep going back to random word exercise, question drill, and video message, and I'm going, hey, are you booking 15 minutes in your calendar to do these things every day? Because that's what's going to get you to the result.
Yeah, because I'm asking the question because speaking with you, I can see, and you're a young guy. I'm 50, so I'm older than I look, and there's no filters turned on. I'm just naturally happy.
You definitely do look older than you look, for sure.
Oh, thank you.
I
But
agree.
but you're a young guy, and you seem to enjoy life very much. You seem to have found your purpose, and worked through that. To me, it sounds like, and I know you've had your struggles because you've talked about it, but you seem to have got to a process where your life today is relatively, consistent, enjoyable. You feel fulfilled on most days, and it sounds like you have a process for doing that. And that's what I wanted to get to. Well, is that a complicated thing that you do every now and then? Or it's a simple process that you do to be happy and feel fulfilled.
For sure, Damien. I love this question. So there's two parts to that question.
Mm.
One is the bliss list that I got from somebody else that I forgot the name of, but I just know it's not mine. And the second process that I did invent called 80/20 questions. So let's get into this. So the first one is just called the bliss list. Bliss list is very simple. Just write down on a piece of paper the little things in your life that bring you joy, not the big things, the
Yeah.
little things. So I don't want you to write trip to Monaco, go into a chauffeur, go, because that's hard to do every day, unless you're
Mowing the
Damien
lawn.
Andrews. Yeah, mowing the lawn, right? So that's a much better example. Mowing the lawn. For me, it's dancing in between my meetings. It's karaokeing. I always like to sing in my basement alone. It's watching reality TV with my sister and fights with my sister. It's eating out with my sister, right? It's the little things in our life
Mm.
that add value, that bring us joy. And to not make it complicated. Like, I love a good Greek pita. Like, my God, it's so good. Or like Portuguese chicken. No offense to vegans listening to this. So for me, the question is just, how do I just do a little bit more of that every day?
Yeah.
That's it. That's one piece. The other piece, which is much deeper and plays justice to your great questions, is the concept itself that I coined called 80/20 questions. So we all know about the 80/20 principle.
Mm.
What are 20% of the actions that drive 80% of the results? But
Mm.
here's my spin on it, Damien, which is, what are 20% of the questions that we can ask ourselves about life that can drive 80% of one's clarity in life? So think of
Mm.
them like shortcut questions. So these are questions I believe can fundamentally transform a human being's life. But the challenge is not that they don't know the questions, because I'm about to give a few of them. They're just
Mm.
not willing to answer the questions for themselves. And that's what goes back to Tony Robbins' point. The quality of your life is solely determined by the quality of the questions that you ask yourself. My version of this, then we'll get into the questions, is I dare everyone listening to this podcast to ask one question every day for 30 days. Because if you do, you'll never be the same ever again. So what are those questions? I'll give you three, not to traumatize your audience too much here. So the first one is, if you could only accomplish three things in your life,
Mm.
and only three, nothing else,
Mhm.
what would you want those three things to be and why? Most people do not have a good answer to it. And it took me years to find my answer. That's
Mm.
one. Question number two. If you had all the money in the world, all the money in the world, well, how would you do to spend your time? Not the money. How would you spend your time? Because what's great about this question is it forces you to retire today. Because all of us are trying to wait for the magic number at 65, 67. I'll retire and then do X. What if I retired you today? I gave you $1 billion. Congratulations, you won the lotto. Now what? Most people answer travel. And I always rebut with, travel for what? 7 years and then die? What else are
Mm.
we doing? Most people, unfortunately, don't have a good answer to that question, Damien.
Yeah.
And finally, question three that I got from Devon Bandison. And he says, well, what's a goal or a dream that you secretly gave up on and never told anyone about? And these are the 80/20 questions. And if you would just answer these three questions, I believe you'll have more clarity than most people in the world.
I love that. They're amazing, amazing questions as well, because what you're talking about there is really getting to the core of who you are. One of the questions I was asked a long time ago is, why do you get up in the morning? And that's when you think about it, why do you get a little alarm clock rang? No, that's not why you got up. There's a whole, and you answer that, great leaders, when you talk about, your Jeff Bezos or your Steve Jobs and Mary Barra, they have a purpose that drives them, and what your questions there do is getting to the heart of those questions. I love that. The other one, the two things that you mentioned there was your bliss list, and I love that too from the perspective of, and I hadn't heard it put that way, and I love how you've described that. But the bliss list is not the big things; it's the little things, and that's massive. That's really massive as to the sense of how to make sure that you really enjoy your day. And I can sense that from talking with you. Your days are amazing because you enjoy arguing with your sister about reality TV. How cool is that? It's like that's just a wonderful thing to be grateful for, because what you're talking about, and we know gratitude works. We having that gratitude, the bliss list of making that the little things that you're grateful for. That's gold. I love that. From the side of things, get back into the public speaking part of that. When we're talking about all these things that we've discussed here, and I wanted to get into that deliberately as to all these benefits and life, because when we talk about public speaking, and I use the term speeching, so I'm creating a new word that's going to go in the dictionary eventually. It's called speeching. When we're speeching, with the a lot of times people go, "Oh, I don't want to be a public speaker." Can you explain what are the benefits of in your life generally? What are global benefits that you get from being able to speak confidently? Can you talk through that and as to why that's of benefit to people?
1000%, Damien. Communication isn't about speaking on a stage. A lot of people think that's what I do, and that's partly what I do. But communication is about leading a more fulfilling life, my friend. It's the way that you raise your family. It's the way that you raise your children. It's the way that you make new friends. It's the way that you order food at a restaurant. It's every interaction. It's every moment of your life. That's why I call communication the accelerant of dreams. It doesn't matter what you want in life, because somebody already has it. And chances are the person who has what you want in life is a pretty damn good communicator. So you need to ask yourself, what is the gap between you and the person that you want to become, the person that you admire, not just from a work ethic perspective, not just from a money perspective, not just from a health perspective, but also from a communication perspective too. How is that person coming off? And that's really the key. And I'll give you a tiny example to demonstrate this in our relationships. We say this 5-word sentence all the time in our life that is absolutely meaningless. And the sentence is, I need more alone time. What does that mean, Damien? Does I need more alone time mean I need 30 minutes in the morning to read a book because it clears my mind? Is it I need to be in a cave for 2 weeks where nobody is allowed to talk to me? Is it, babe, only I get to mow the lawn, not you, right? What? Because I want that alone time. What does that mean? Notice how that one sentence can get misconstrued in 100 different directions, including, oh, is it because you don't love me anymore? That's one of the interpretations too. So communication is not just about saying, I want to speak on a stage. It's about saying, how do I improve the quality of the relationships around my life? Example, hey, babe, I would really appreciate an hour in the morning to read a book because it clears my mind and really helps it helps me show up better for my family. Is there any way we can work on this together? That is specific communication that gets you better results, and why, frankly, I've never argued with my mom or my sister in the last decade. That's the key.
So is it really that, I mean, because that's a great example of having that communication, being able to clearly articulate what it is that you want to say and get the result that you want. And similar sort of thing. I mean, I have a 14-year-old son, never yelled at him ever.
Wow, that's impressive.
So it's about showing respect and asking the question. So this is where I wanted to get to these benefits. I mean, you talked about that, where you have a relationship with your mum and sister where you've never argued with them. What are some of the other examples from that someone can, when we're talking about benefits? Because I think that's a tremendous benefit, and I think where the world is heading when we talk about things. I mean, I don't know, it's terrible that it happens, but we're talking about quite as far as there's a lot of family violence is in the press at the moment, and addressing that, which is wonderful that we're addressing that. Things like that, where that communication is probably going to help prevent that as a preventative measure. What are some of the other things as far as benefits go that, this whole public speaking, because again, is it you're talking about, it's not public speaking, it's not standing up on a stage speaking. Yes, if you do that, that's part of it, but really what you're talking about is in-depth communication. What are some other examples of benefits people get from this?
Absolutely, and there's a bunch, so I'll list off a few.
Mm.
When you're telling your children that you really love them. When was the last time you did that, right? You look into somebody's eyes and you just say, I really appreciate you. Sending a video message to somebody you love and just go, hey, who lives on the other side of the planet. This goes, hey, I'm thinking about you. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I just really appreciate what you do in my life. That's another example of communication.
Mm.
Another example of communication is when you meet somebody new at a party and they think you're the most interesting person they've ever met. Not because you talk a lot, but because you're a great listener, because you're great at asking questions. That's communication, right? It's the way that we show up for people. I'll give you a story. Recently, I was speaking at IBM, which is the company I used to work at, and I go there once a year to speak. And I entered that building, and I hadn't worked there in years. And some guy comes up to me and he shakes my hand and he goes, "Hey, you really made a difference in my life." I don't even remember who this guy is. Like, he's like, what do you mean? He's like, when I interviewed for this company 2 years ago, and you were one of the guys managing the interview process, and I was really nervous. I was sitting there waiting for my turn, and you were running because you were busy with work, Brenden. You were running, and you looked at me and you said, "Oh, are you doing the interview?" with a smile. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm here for the interview." And I just looked at him and I said, "Oh, you'll do just fine." And he looked at me and he said, "The second you said that, Brenden, all of my nerves went away." And then when I went into the interview, I crushed it and I got the job. And it's all thanks to you. And I looked at it and I was like, what are you talking about? That's communication. It's about making people's lives better. It's the way we show up for people. And it also makes you more likable. So those, I think, are the main benefits. I'm sure there's a bunch that I missed, but I think I would love for you to add on as well if you thought of a couple that I didn't think of. But I think the biggest one, Damien, is really, it just makes you enjoy the process of life better. The quality of life better. Like going to a stranger when you're traveling. If you're a great communicator, you just go up to them. You don't even know their language. And you're just body languaging with them. You're like, "Oh, where should I go?" And you're smiling at them. They'll smile back at you and go, "Oh, you go over here," and you strike up a conversation with them. You never know where that's going to go.
I love that. And yeah, the confidence that you're talking about there, the confidence to go up and just talk to somebody because you know you can. That's tremendous to be able to have that and to ask for the things that you want. The other thing I was going to talk about and ask you about as far as the communication, some of the benefits that we're talking about is, and I think I learned this too late in life, but was part of it's not so much what you say, but how you make the other person feel. And to that, to have a communication where you can actually leave and the other person feels great. I mean, from that side of things, how do you think that affects the relationships you have with people?
So you're really asking about, just to make sure I got that, the relationships between other people and how communication improves those relationships?
Yeah, well, a lot of the times people, when we talk about, we're trying to, especially, I mean, if you're in business, we're talking about sales here, and you're trying to say things to the person and make, get the knowledge across. But the reality, the underlying communication and the benefit is creating, what the person remembers generally is how you made them feel. And having the skill to do that, I would suggest creates better relationships, which is going to lead to so many different benefits from that. Is that something that you find people experience as well?
For sure, Damien. I would say for me, great, thanks for that, is when we're able to have conversations with people in a sales situation and we focus not just on the delivery, but on the emotions related to that delivery, it changes the way that people perceive your message. In like relationships, a great example. I need you to do this versus, hey, can you do this for me? I'd really appreciate it. Notice how both of those things still asking for the same thing,
You
but
put
the
on your late night
gesture.
DJ voice then as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so vocal tones is a big piece to that for sure. It's not being abrasive unless the person likes that. It depends who you're speaking to. You got to change your energy. But the general idea is you need to look at it from both lenses. So if you're on a sales call, one lens is, am I answering these questions confidently and am I giving the right answer, which is obviously the most important thing. But then the other piece is going, through my delivery of these answers, am I making somebody feel confident in my process and what I'm doing? So there's a big difference between saying, this is the answer, this is what I'm doing, versus what I'm doing on this podcast, when I'm not yelling at people, I'm just going, hey, this is what I'm thinking. This is where the direction is. This is where I'm seeing it. And I don't have all the answers, and that's okay. As you'll notice is that part of my own answer is also delivering it in a way where people go, I kind of like this Brenden guy. I
Mm.
like where he's coming from. Maybe he doesn't like mowing the lawn, but he's nice to his sister and his mom. And I'm indirectly weaving in all these points to be more likable. But it's also the person I am, so it's not that hard to do. But the key is we need to be conscious of that, because there's a big difference in going, this is the answer versus this is how we would approach it in our shoes. And that second version is a lot less threatening to people, and people open up to person number two a lot more than person number one.
I love that. That's awesome. And I love what you talked about there. And maybe this is because I know we're short of time now, but you mentioned about abrasiveness. And I've got a great story about where I exploded at someone to actually create, and it created a better relationship. But I'll save that for another time. Because I know we're short of time here, and it's a little teaser. So but from that, because I know we are short of time, so do you want to talk about, this is your product placement part of the podcast. Do you want to tell us about the services that you offer? How do people contact you? I mean, this is what we're here for too. People need to be able to reach out to you. So what do you want to tell us about the services that you offer, where they contact you, that kind of thing, please?
Absolutely, David. I must say, in all of my hundreds of podcast appearances, this was the hardest one to get to the end, I must say, because you had such great questions. You really worked my mind today, so I really appreciate it. It's very rare, so which I love. And thanks for such a great conversation. So 2 ways to keep in touch. I'll keep the product placement short and sweet. So the first one is just a YouTube channel. You can go to Master Talk. In one word, you'll have access to hundreds of free videos on how to speak. And the second way to keep in touch is I do a free Zoom call every 2 weeks for the community on the topic of communication. So I give a free communication workshop that's entirely live and that's free. 8-year-old kids come to that training. You also have big executives who come to that training. Literally everybody's invited. It's a party. So I encourage you to sign up for the next one at rockstarcommunicator.com.
Love that. And we'll put all those details in the show notes as well, so that people can reach out to you from that. And definitely, that free training sounds awesome. So it's like, and I know you've invited me, and I haven't been able to go, but I am going to come and attend. I'm going to make a special time to join that as well, because it sounds so exciting. It's like a big part.
Honestly, Damon, in your case, it makes sense because the Australian time is probably really early in the morning, so you're off the hook. It's not like you live in the States.
But I've been wanting to do it. I'm going to make a time, and I'm going to get up early and do that.
Wow, that's commitment, man.
You just have such energy, and it'd be so exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. So before we go, and I know you've got to run because you've got a deadline. Before we go, can you tell us, if you would give the audience a takeaway, it can be one or many, but what would be your key takeaways? What would be your key wisdoms, your choice, that you would want the audience to leave with?
Absolutely, Damien. For me, it's going back to that one sentence. Be insane or be the same. If you want to be like everyone else, that's totally fine. But if you made it all the way to the end of this long podcast and you're still listening, it means you really want to create something important with your life. It means you're really all about personal growth and leveling up. Guess what, though? The people who actually do something meaningful in their life are often insane. Don't you find it odd, Damien, that you're talking to a kid, practically, who started a YouTube channel, not on pranks, not on skits, not on music, but on public speaking and executive communication tips. And then the year after, he went on to coach people double his age, built a successful coaching practice for communication, yet he still lives in his mother's basement. He's karaoke's in 8 different languages. He's in the top 1% of all listeners on Spotify for Justin Bieber. And he owns a car. He bought it himself, but he's too scared to drive it, so his sister drives it for him. How does any of this make any sense at all, my friend? And that's the point. When every decision in your life makes sense to the only person that it should, which is you, you're probably making the right decisions. So be insane or be the same would be my final thought.
Awesomeness. That is just total amazing. Be insane. I love it. Brenden Kumarasamy, it has been wonderful having you on the show. Hopefully we can have a catch up again sometime in the future, but thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing so much wisdom and getting right in deep in these questions.
It was such a treat for me, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.